Hi, I'm Angel Russell, and you're watching SAGE, the Sex and Gender Education series from PFLAG of Jacksonville. On this episode, Beyond the Binary, Understanding the Spectrum of Sex and Gender. First, we have to start with understanding the difference between sex and gender. Right now, when we're talking about sex, we mean biology and not behavior. We're referring to a person's anatomical and physiological makeup. There are four main categories of information that go into determining a person's biological sex: genital and reproductive anatomy, hormones, chromosomes, and secondary sex characteristics. Gender, on the other hand, is not biological. Gender is psychological and social. More specifically, gender is a social construct. That means it's shaped by social messaging most of us receive before we're even born, and our perceptions of how those social messages apply to us. In fact, birth, or even before, is when we receive our very first social message about gender and how others think it might apply to us. When a baby's born, someone looks at the baby's genitals, sees a vulva or a penis, and announces, "It's a girl" or "It's a boy." When we make a call about someone based solely on their genitals, we're making a guess about both their sex and their gender. That guess is called your sex and gender assigned at birth. We call it a guess because neither sex nor gender is binary, and neither one can be deduced solely by looking at someone's genitals. If their guess is right about your sex, and you're either biologically male or female, that's called being endosex. If their guess is wrong about your sex, that means you have some sex variation, and that's called intersex. Very rarely is intersex assigned at birth, but we'll devote another episode entirely to sex and sexual variation to explain that in depth. If the gender you were assigned at birth was a right guess, and it matches the gender identity you have now, you're cisgender. Cis just means same. Your gender is the same as it was when it was assigned to you. If the gender you were assigned at birth was a wrong guess and does not match the gender identity you have now, you're transgender. Trans just means other than. Your gender is something other than what it was when it was assigned to you. Not everyone this applies to uses the label transgender to talk about their identity, though. Some people use the language non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, gender nonconforming, and more. We'll do a totally separate episode dedicated to just defining some terms and laying a bit more groundwork here. For now, it's enough to know that both sex and gender are vast spectrums full of possibility beyond the binary of male or female, man or woman. Okay, let's break it down a little bit more. Pretend you're filling out a survey and they want to know if you like burgers or fries. They give you 2 boxes and they ask you to check 1. Now, if you really like fries but hate burgers, this is an easy choice for you, and you probably won't even give it a second thought. But if you like or don't like both options, it's probably already occurred to you that there's a better way to ask this question. Okay, so let's try it again. Let's try a spectrum with burgers on one end and fries on the other. We'll put a dot closest to the one that you like best. Again, if you have one you like more, you might be fine with this new system. But let's think about it some more. If I put a dot really close to burgers, does that mean that the more I like burgers, the less I like fries? What if I really love them both? What if I don't like either of them? Where does my dot go then? What if instead it got laid out like this? A separate way to assess how much you like burgers, how much you like fries, and how much you like some other food that you get to identify. Thinking about it like this gives you the chance to say how much you do or don't like each thing in a way that works the best for you. Okay, so now hold on to that thought and let's go back to sex and gender. Remember that gender is a social construct. It's a bunch of arbitrary rules made up by society that have changed throughout history. It's fluid socially, and for most of us, it's a bit fluid even in our individual selves. For some people, their sex is a big part of how they think about their gender, and for others, it's not. Think about what it means to you for someone to be a man. Are they a man because they embody masculine traits? Is it because they have a penis? Is it how deep their voice is or whether they look good in flannel? Gender is about all these social rules we have about what is masculine, feminine, or neutral, and the ways we feel about how those rules apply to us. Sex is about what's going on in our bodies. And then there's this space in between where it's kind of hard to tease those things apart. In sexual configurations theory, Dr. Sari Van Anders calls this in-between area gender/sex. According to sexual configuration theory, sex is aspects of femaleness, maleness, and sex-related bodily features that are biological, evolved, physical, and/or innate. For example, vulvas, penises, breasts, body shape. This may also refer to one's internal sense of self. Some examples of language we use for this are male, female, and intersex. Gender, according to sexual configuration theory, is aspects of masculinity, femininity, and gender diversity that are socialized, learned, and cultural. For example, appearance, behavior, presentation, and how you comport yourself. This may also refer to one's internal sense of self, culture, roles, and other beliefs about this stuff. Some examples of the language we use for this are feminine, masculine, transgender, genderqueer, butch, and femme. Dr. Van Anders describes gender/sex as whole people/identities and/or aspects of people that relate to identity and/or cannot be sourced specifically to sex or gender. Some examples of the language we use for this would be man, woman, cis man, trans man, NB, intersex person. We're using language that describes both sex and gender when we use those words. Okay, think back on those burgers and fries checkboxes. Based on how you're thinking about gender and sex right now, you can probably imagine that the old male and female boxes don't quite cut it to help us explain and understand all this. Instead, let me introduce you to the Sex and Gender Gargoyle, designed by me, drawn by Omar Safi, and informed by Dr. Van Anders' sexual configuration theory. You can see my friend here covers a lot of bases because sexuality is complex and nuanced. For now, let's stay focused on sex and gender. Let's imagine a person named Tammy. Tammy was born with a vulva, so she was assigned female at birth and named Tamra. As Tamra grew up and learned about gender, she liked being a girl, and that made a lot of sense to her. She was also very athletic and really enjoyed playing football and dressing in her favorite team's gear. Tammy identifies as a cisgender woman and uses female to describe her sex. Now, let's imagine a person named Stevie. Stevie was born with a penis, so Stevie was assigned male at birth and given the name Steven. As Stevie grew up and learned about gender, she liked to wear a lot of feminine clothing, and she really resonated with a lot of gender roles typically associated with women and femininity. She changed her name to Stevie and identifies as a transgender woman. Stevie has decided to only have what's called top surgery, which means she had a breast augmentation, but still has her penis and wants to keep it. She doesn't think of her sex as inherently male or female, though, so she personally uses the language transsexual and sex queer to describe her sex. You can see all the ways that male/female and man/woman don't quite fit right for Stevie. There are many ways that these things apply to cisgender, transgender, and non-binary people. For example, not every trans or non-binary person ever wants to take hormones or have surgery, and some cisgender people do want to do those things. Not every cis person looks and acts exactly the way you expect someone of their gender to look and act, and it's the same for trans and non-binary people. Take some time to think about where you land on these spectrums and what language you like to use for yourself. Or head to pflagjax.org/sage and grab a free download of the Sex and Gender Gargoyle for yourself. That's all for this episode of Sage. If you have a question or topic you'd like to see us cover, or if you'd like to bring Sage education to a space near you, email sage@pflagjax.org and let us know. Thank you for watching.